Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Roberta Simmons Distinguished Lecture. And I am going to give a brief but very honorable introduction to our speaker today, Cigdem Kagitcibasi. Cigdem is internationally known for her research on family relationships, her perspective, a cultural perspective, but also a universalist perspective, on different ways to conceptualize and understand relationships, which I think, based on her title, is going to be one of her themes today. And, as well, her contributions to early childhood and other family and intervention programs, which she has promoted and sponsored throughout Europe and throughout the world. Cigdem is an international citizen or a world citizen, although she has written widely and talked about the importance of family and family relationships from her perspective as a Turkish woman. It turns out that she got her bachelor's degree at Wellesley and her PhD from UC Berkeley in social psychology. So she, early in her life, studied Western psychology, but always took it from the perspective of her own background, her own experience, and applied both of those views to her research. She has been a consultant and a promoter of early childhood and family programs through UNESCO in her own country of Turkey, throughout the EU, in the United States, and elsewhere. She is a leading figure in the promotion of an understanding of culture and context in the study of human development. She has received many honors and awards, both in Europe, in her own country of Turkey, and in the United States and elsewhere. And it is a pleasure to welcome her today to the SRA Prize Lecture. She was telling me earlier this morning that this is her first visit to the Society for Research on Adolescence, although I can attest that she attends many conferences and meetings around the world, and I certainly hope it won't be her last. So please welcome Cigdem.
Thank you very much, Tom. I appreciate it. Just one correction. I got my bachelor's degree at Wellesley College. So I was rather young when I changed cultures from Turkey to the United States. The first time I was on a plane. It was a plane from Istanbul to Boston, not direct, of course, at that time. So it was a cultural experience altogether at quite young age. I appreciate being invited to give the Roberta Grodberg Simmons Prize Lecture. It's an honor, and I am delighted to be here with you, sharing my thoughts with you this morning. We could talk about this topic for a whole day, of course, and you notice that the subtitle has a question mark at the end, and it is a question mark. I will be sharing with you my ideas of the family and self developing in the family, and the theoretical perspectives I have developed on the changing family from a global perspective, and the development of the self in the changing family. And I want to start out showing a graph that I like to show also to my students, because it's an eye-opener. It is this one. And I think it's really telling with regard to what is happening in the world. If you notice, only in 1990, if you can see in the very back, or if you want to come forward, some of you please do, because I don't know if you can see everything from there. Only in 1990, the rural youth population in developing countries was twice as large as the urban population. Only in 1990. And in just a few years, in 2015, these two populations are expected to equal each other in the developing countries. And only in 2025, the urban youth population is expected to exceed the rural youth population considerably. This is a tremendous human phenomenon that we need to keep in mind all the time if we are talking about human psychology, change, social change, and if we want to take a global outlook and do international psychology, move out of the North American context. And I show this as the first slide because this, for my thinking, this kind of change in the world is of prime importance. Therefore, we need to take context into account, and clearly we need to be aware of fundamental shifts, both from rural to urban environments, and also increasing socioeconomic development, and increasing similarities in lifestyles, therefore, with urbanization especially. But nevertheless, there appears to be continuing cultural diversity. So lifestyles are changing, and significantly, and there's also international migration, where people from less developed contexts, socioeconomic development contexts, are moving into mostly the Western world. And can we then talk about a model of healthy adolescent development? Can we depict some aspects of adolescent development, self-development in general, and find some similarities amid the differences? My work over the past, I don't know how many years, 40 years or so, has led to family change theory and self-theory, originating from the value of children study in 1970s, and built upon subsequent research, including also a partial replication of the value of children study in 2003. And I will start with some of the findings, just very few of the findings of this study, looking into a comparison, a 30-year comparison, to give us some idea about family dynamics. This study is now being done in 14 countries, and more countries are joining in, so it is a continuing endeavor. And I want to share with you this simple graphic for reasons for wanting a child. This was an open-ended question asked of respondents. This is a Turkish picture in 1975 and 2003. And you can't read underneath, but the first one is, as a reason for wanting to have a child, is pleasure in watching children grow. It's a pleasure to watch children grow, the first column. The second one is fun to have young children around, to have someone to love and care for, the third one. The others are children can help when you are old. Child helps around the house, to help your family economically, to have a boy, or another boy. These are very different reasons for wanting a child. And we have done lots of analyses on these over the years also. And what we find is that there are basically two main reasons or two factors involved in this. The psychological satisfactions that children provide and the material economic satisfactions that children provide. So the psychological value of children and the utilitarian economic value of children. And having a boy in most of the world also brings social acceptance, so that is a social value that can be seen as a social value. The main point of this graphic is that in 1975, the darker columns are from 1975, you see that most of these reasons were about of the same importance for people. Whereas what happens in a period of 30 years is a tremendous shift in the way children are perceived, viewed, and valued. Psychological values of children show dramatic increase, and economic values that children have, especially old-age security value of children for their parents, shows a decrease. Why is this happening? Because of changing lifestyles. So in terms of socioeconomic development, urbanization, and immigration, what we see is that economic utilitarian traditional value of children decreases, but psychological VOC, value of the child for the parent, remains the same or even increases in salience, as we have seen in Turkey. So, in conjunction with social change, family changes also. What this means, what that figure showed us, is that material dependencies in the family between generations are decreasing, but emotional dependencies are continuing. What do I mean by this? In the traditional family, the child is expected to be dependent on the parent, to be obedient, take what the parent says as the rule. But this dependence is to be reversed later on as the dependence of the elderly parent on the grown-up offspring for his livelihood. So this is a model of total interdependence. And we know about this. This is in agrarian subsistence economy, agrarian traditional society, very, very common in the world. But it changes. The family, it shifts into the psychological interdependence because material dependencies decrease with increased affluence. People who are in urban contexts are salaried, have other old-age security benefits than depending on their children. So material dependencies decrease, but emotional, psychological dependencies continue because of what I call culture of relatedness, or collectivistic cultures, where human relations, relations between selves are quite closely tied. So this model includes both relatedness and also autonomy starting, and I will move into that. This finding, but also findings from other countries, actually challenge a modernization theory prediction of a convergence on the Western independence model, because a shift toward individualism, separation in the family, and with regard to the self, is not seen. So an alternative path seems to be the rule here, happening here. A third model, family model of psychological or emotional interdependence seems to be appearing, and at the level of the self, this involves autonomy and relatedness. So very briefly, to go through this model, this is the prototypical model of total interdependence in collectivistic subsistence law, subsistence economy, rural, agrarian, low affluence. Here, some preference, utilitarian value of children is important, economic value of children, old age security value of children, and material expectations from the child. The family is a self-sustaining system and depends on itself for its livelihood through the family life cycle. And in this kind of a family, authoritarian parenting is adaptive, it's functional, and it's valued because the child who is obedient then is more likely to be a loyal offspring later on and take care of his own parents and family rather than take care of his own personal needs. So what we have here is the development of the related self, connected self. But there's no room for autonomy here because autonomy of the child can be seen as a threat to the family integrity. Because an autonomous child can become an independent young person and go off and take care of his own needs and separate from the family. Model of independence is the prototypical contrasting middle-class Western model with culture of what I call culture of separateness, individualistic, separate selves, and urban industrial affluence or post-industrial society. Nuclear ties and all sorts of things are going on here, but I'm going very fast through these models. The important point here is that psychological value of children is important, and economic value of children does not exist. Why? Because children become costly. To have many children costs a lot, and you don't depend on your children in your old age to live on their financial contributions. So there is no economic value of children. And if you still have a child, there must be another reason for having a child rather than an economic reason. And that's where the psychological reasons become really salient. I want to have a child because I love children, kind of reason. But in this perspective, we have the development of separate self and relatively permissive parenting and autonomy and self-reliance orientation in child rearing in line with individualistic worldview, and autonomous child is developing here, but separate at the same time. Now, the modernization perspective says that there's a shift from the former model of interdependence, total interdependence, to this model with changing lifestyles, with urbanization, industrialization, and so on. But as I said, actually, that appears to be too simple, too simplistic, as recent cross-cultural research is questioning it. The third model that I have proposed is a synthesis of the other two, in the sense that we are still talking about culture of relatedness, collectivistic culture, which actually represents 3/4 of the world's population. But there is urbanization, industrialization, increased affluence all over the world, as I started out showing, with urbanization going on in the developing countries, so-called developing countries, what I call the majority world. The family structure changes accordingly, but what is important for our purposes here is, here again, the economic value of the child does not exist, has disappeared. It's the psychological value of the child that is important. And in this kind of a family, there is something of a more authoritative parenting, which involves both control and autonomy. This may appear like a contradiction in terms, but autonomy needs to come into child rearing in the developed context, urban context in the world, because of two reasons it comes in. One is that autonomy of the child is not any longer a threat to the family integrity, because, as I said, material dependencies on the grown-up offspring have decreased. Therefore, it's all right for a child to be autonomous. You don't depend on that child's financial contribution in your old age. So autonomy is not considered to be a bad thing any longer. In our research, when we asked parents with low education levels, for example, if it's a good thing for a child to be autonomous, they say no. And they are very clear about that, open, because they say an autonomous child is headstrong, stubborn, not nice to the parents, not respectful enough, and so on and so forth. Whereas when you talk with highly educated parents, indeed what you find is that they think it's an asset. So the values regarding autonomy change, also because with changed lifestyles, autonomy does become an asset in higher education context, in specialized professional jobs and so on. Just submission to rules, obeying the rules, obedience does not get a young person very far. So because of these changes in lifestyles, autonomy is coming into the picture. Nevertheless, the culture of relatedness is there, and therefore we also have the relatedness values there. And we get the development of autonomous related self, which is quite different from just the related self. And it's also quite different than just the autonomous self, because here we have a combination of these characteristics. And I want to refer to a study conducted in Turkey with low education and high education parents. And one of the questions asked was, would you want your children, when they grow up, to be grateful to you? Grateful. Minnettar in Turkish. There are a few Turkish people in the audience. To be grateful to you. And this is a fascinating thing, because the responses were quite different from the two groups. Parents with low education and low income said yes, they would want their children to be grateful. I have done all this for my child, and I would want my child to do the same for me. I have sacrificed for him, and so I expect him to pay back. Gratefulness involves reciprocity, and especially material dependencies or interdependencies. Whereas the parents with higher education said no, they don't want their children to be grateful when they grow up, but they want their children to be close to them, close psychologically. And this is of key importance. And that is the distinction between the two models of family. I have already talked about these, so I will just continue. And what I want to tell you is that there is quite a bit of research evidence now emerging for some time, since 1990s actually, emerging from various parts of the world, which provide some support to these ideas. For example, Koutrourakos in immigration context found decreasing material but continuing emotional interdependencies in Greek Americans. Kwok, in a review of research with adolescents, noted the common preference of adolescents, especially immigrant adolescents in the United States again, for both autonomy and family relatedness. Lin and Fu were probably the first ones to show a combined autonomy and control orientation in Chinese parents. Dekovic, Pels, and Model, and Günger, all in the Netherlands, noted both parental warmth and control in immigrant families in Holland. I'm just picking out some, and a rather recent study that we conducted in 27 countries, looking into the families of university students, so higher socioeconomic level families. We found evidence for autonomy and relatedness to coexist in the psychologically interdependent family. Again, different studies from Hong Kong, Korea. Heidi Keller, who's here, has shown in different studies in several countries pointing to results pointing to the three different patterns. She looks at them as pathways of development, which tend to correspond to the three different models of the family. And most recently, with Meyer, Tromsdorf, and Mishra, we compared families in Germany, Turkey, and India from the recent value of children study, and found clear evidence for the theory of family change. So there is a lot of evidence, and here, this is the study I just mentioned. Starting with this. Actually, this has been just published, and I'm one of the co-authors. This is from an earlier paper of Meyer and Tromsdorf. This is a very interesting graphic. The three patterns, total interdependence, family pattern, emotional interdependence, and independence, are clearly differentiated. And especially where they are differentiated in all respects, but especially in the decreasing utilitarian normative value of children found in emotional interdependence and independence here, families, whereas it is high, the material utilitarian values of children is high in total interdependence. Whereas emotional value of the child in all groups is about the same. So this is very recent evidence. And it is reflected, for example, in a response where adolescents, this is asked of the adolescents, where they are given a situation where they either can help their parents do something, or they can meet their friends. And what is found is that in the independence model, the adolescents prefer to meet their friends and not help their parents. In the interdependence model, it's just the opposite. They all leave their friends and help their parents. And the third model is in between. Now, when we move further and look at the self-theory, again, autonomy-relatedness dynamics is at the core of my self-theory, and we find that autonomy and relatedness tend to be a challenge for psychology, because since 1950s, actually, especially with the profound influence of psychoanalytic perspectives, autonomy and relatedness have been accepted by almost everyone as basic human needs, but also as conflicting. That's where we find the conflicting theories of personality, for example. And so if they are conflicting, but at the same time they are basic, there is a problem here. There is a challenge. The construal of autonomy and relatedness as conflicting has prevailed over autonomy and relatedness as basic needs. Thus, relatedness is often seen as incompatible with autonomy, and separation from others is seen as necessary for autonomy. Starting with separation individuation hypothesis and infancy of Mahler, Minuchin's family systems theory, and adolescence being seen as a second separation individuation, for example, Bloss. All these perspectives are with us, and they are significant in how we understand parent-child relations. And yesterday, for example, Niobe Wei also talked about this issue and complained about some of the assumptions that are commonly held in North America, especially the United States. Now, this is just a schematic representation of the different types of selves, connected and separate selves, and the family like this. When I show this slide to my students and my students are from educated families and postgraduate students, university students, and I ask them, which one is more like your family? Is more like your family? And they all say this. And now and then I get an American student or a Western European student as an exchange student in my class, and they say this. And it never fails. It's always like that. And this has been taken into popular psychology also with regard to what is better, what is worse. This type of family, for example, with Minichin's, as I mentioned, family systems theory, this is considered healthy, whereas this is considered enmeshed or pathological. And it goes into this. I like to show this. I really like this. This is a British self-help book that I got from a British store. It says, how to be your own best friend. You don't even need a best friend. You're completely self-sufficient. And be your own best friend and water yourself. So this is how it goes. And is this really reflecting reality? Is a whole other matter. But this is in the ideology. This is in the culture, very much emphasized in the individualism in the Western society. Whereas, for example, think of an example from Hiroshi Azuma, a Japanese developmental psychologist, who gives the example when the child is being difficult and not doing what the mother asks him to do. The mother's typical response is, you and I are one. We can be and must be of the same mind. This is a symbiotic relationship par excellence. But Azuma tells us this is very, very typical. So is the whole Japanese society pathological? I'm not even going into the Turkish society, because when I talk about these things, certainly Turkish villages are all pathological. There's something wrong here. It's not that the theory is wrong, but an application of a theory with culture-blind approach just doesn't work. Indeed, while all societies manage to meet these two basic needs, autonomy has been prioritized in the individualistic Western world, and often at the expense of interpersonal relatedness. And this is cultural. Western individualism is important here. Yet it is neither logically nor psychologically necessary for autonomy to mean separateness if we recognize the existence of two distinct dimensions. And this is the theoretical perspective that I put forward in understanding the self. Indeed, there are two different dimensions of self and relations with others. One is agency, the dimension of agency that goes from autonomy to heteronomy. I'm using Piaget's term heteronomy here, where Piaget used this in the understanding of moral development of the child, heteronomous morality then leading to autonomous morality with age. The idea is that autonomy means, or agency in general, means being able to act on the environment, being able to be an agent. And whereas dependency is to be dependent on someone else's rule or law. But this is a different kind of, both logically and psychologically, a different type of phenomenon than interpersonal distance. Interpersonal distance is a psychological distance, kind of a hypothetical distance between selves, going from separateness to relatedness. As I showed a minute ago, selves can be overlapping or they can be separate. And so it is just a matter of how close self-other relations are, going from separateness to connectedness. But if these are distinct dimensions, then it means that either pole of each could coexist with either pole of the other one. And it's not necessary that you have separateness with autonomy. You could have relatedness with autonomy. These two dimensions also reflect the basic human needs for autonomy and relatedness. And this is especially relevant in adolescence, where a balanced coexistence of these two basic needs becomes an issue and is more optimal. So therefore, a conceptual model of different types of selves can look like this. If we assume that these two dimensions are orthogonal, we can put this kind of a figure. They may not be orthogonal, they may be somewhat related, but this is one way of showing that they are distinct psychologically and logically distinct dimensions. Okay, so here are the four different types of selves that emerge here if there is both autonomy and separation from others. There is autonomous separate self. But if there is autonomy and relatedness with others, there is autonomous related self. This conceptualization renders viable the autonomous related self. But despite the consensual agreement that autonomy and relatedness are basic needs, this self-conscious rule has not been readily recognized in psychology, even in cross-cultural psychology, given the individualistic outlooks of the psychologists. Yet this model, I believe, promises to be a healthy integration since it satisfies both of the basic needs. It appears that individualistic societies have recognized the basic need for autonomy, but have not recognized adequately the basic need for relatedness. And collectivistic societies have done just the opposite. They have recognized the basic need for relatedness, but not adequately recognized the basic need for autonomy, and both leave something to be desired. We need to have a balanced combination. So from a theory of family change, the value of children's study results, and what we find with regard to the three different family patterns, or from the model of self with the two basic underlying needs of autonomy and relatedness, we come to the autonomous related self. And there is, again, research evidence for this, especially Ryan, self-determination theory, Chirkov, Butzel, Kim, Deci. A lot of research shows that, for example, there's a positive relation with autonomy and relatedness. And this is more positive, the relation between autonomy and relatedness is more positive than the relationship between autonomy and separateness in both Korean but also in American samples. And this is important because it goes against the view that separation is necessary for autonomy to develop. And again, Keller found Greek mothers and German mothers to show different interaction styles that could be differentiated from each other, one leading to autonomy and relatedness, the Greek mothers, but German mothers leading toward autonomy and separateness. And Luc Goossens and Meyer's work found separation and agency as two independent dimensions and showed separation from parents to be associated with developmental problems. So there is quite a bit of support for the distinctness and possible coexistence of autonomy and relatedness. And as self-determination theorists say, actually autonomy can and does develop within relatedness with regard to adolescent parent relationships. All right, one of the last references I found was with regard to the Inuit parents in Canada, which I found very interesting. Again, evidencing both autonomy and relatedness when they move to urban areas in Canada. And Öztürk finding autonomous relatedness to predict relationship satisfaction among both Turkish but also British adults. So I think we need to take all this evidence seriously. There have also been conceptual and measurement issues in this, especially in cross-cultural psychology, where independence, interdependence concepts have been put forward by Marcus and Kitayama and have been popularized by them and are being used extensively. But these are two large groupings because the so-called independent self scales and conceptualization also tap separateness, but also autonomy, whereas collectivism or interdependent self scales tap relatedness, but also heteronomy. Again, the claim that one cannot be autonomous and related at the same time, which is a strange claim when you think of 3/4 of the world's population being related, so they couldn't be autonomous. 3/4 of the world's population. Something's wrong there. So this is by implication, even the existence of autonomy in closely knit collectivistic cultures has been questioned. So we have developed, we wanted to separate out these ideas, and we developed an autonomy scale that does not tap relatedness or separateness, and a relatedness scale that does not tap autonomy or heteronomy, and both self and self in family scales. And we have done a comparative study with university students from Belgium, Germany, Hong Kong, Turkey, United States, and United Kingdom. And with samples like this, more than 1,000 sample. And this is the perspective that we have used there. I don't know if you can see in the back, but again here, autonomous self, heteronymous self, related, and separateness from others, related self, and the idea to find out what kind of a relationship between these two dimensions we can find. And we cross-culturally validated these constructs and investigated the cross-cultural variability of the correlation of these constructs with this question, what is the relationship of these two dimensions? We also investigated the within culture variability of the combinations of autonomy and relatedness in these different cultures. And we found that even a further refinement of the constructs of autonomy and also relatedness are in order. We found, in particular, something that we can call behavioral autonomy as different from ideational autonomy. And I had also thought in these terms earlier, but not calling them these in this way. I wrote about relational individualism and normative individualism. Normative individualism has to do with ideas, ideologies of what is right, what is wrong, what is good. They are norms. Whereas relational individualism or collectivism has to do with self-other relations, how people are situated with regard to others. And so this came out empirically as something similar to that idea. But behavioral autonomy has to do with the actual behavior, autonomous behavior, whereas ideational autonomy has more to do with ideation, the idealization of autonomy. And in the same way, related self and merged self could be differentiated. With the merged self, other boundaries are completely merged, whereas a related self shows relatedness, but boundaries are not merged. So these are just some attempts to look at the picture in a more complex way. And indeed, their combinations did bring out empirically the 4 different ideal types that I mentioned. The autonomous related, ideal type 1, ideal type 2, heteronymous related, ideal type 3, autonomous separate, and ideal type 4, heteronymous separate. All 4 appeared out of the empirical findings, which has provided support to the theory of the self. Now, with regard to the application implications and what this means, I am putting forward the idea that there might be possibly a universal optimal developmental model. And why do I say that? Because of converging lifestyles, because of the very first slide that I showed, of urbanization in the world, lifestyles becoming more similar, children in school rather than working in the field, increased education, increased affluence, and also basic human needs that have actually evolutionary basis. The need for relatedness, of course, has survival value to be related with others in the face of danger, for example. And the need for agency or autonomy also has survival value because you have to act on the environment. So there's no question that these are basic needs. They are not the only basic needs, probably, but they are basic needs. And this is especially relevant in adolescent development because adolescents are moving through socioeconomic development and change, either through increased socioeconomic development in countries, or rural to urban migration, or international migration. And this possibly optimal developmental model would involve autonomous related self and psychologically, emotionally interdependent family. And so, this didn't come out right for some reason, but what I am proposing is a different kind of convergence on the autonomous related self, moving from the heteronymous related on the one hand and autonomous separate on the other hand, to the autonomous related because it satisfies both of the basic human needs. And the family model also moving from total interdependence, but also from independence to psychological, emotional interdependence, because there the needs for psychological closeness are better recognized. But of course, this can be debated. I am making this proposal on the basis of the 2 basic needs, as I said, and also on the basis of what is happening in the world. But it is also possible to see the 3rd pattern as a transitional stage toward the Western pattern. So from the perspective of the family change theory and self models, a convergence toward the family model of psychological interdependence and autonomous related self may be predicted. And this prediction would hold both for the majority world and for immigrants with increased need for autonomy in child rearing as an adaptation to socioeconomic development and to changing lifestyles. But it would also hold for the minority world, the Western world, with increased need for relatedness. So this is my thinking. But there may be a caveat, and this is important, this trend may be counteracted. This may not actually happen for 2 reasons. There is cultural diffusion of dominant Western individualistic models to the whole world today, in popular media, in television, films, in every way. Individualistic model is exported to the world as the most developed. And the reason it's exported, it doesn't say it's the most developed, but it is perceived as the most developed because it comes from the most developed countries. So especially young people, adolescents, emulate this. They try to reach it. I'll just give you one example from Turkish television. An advertisement for a mobile phone. There's this young woman, attractive adolescent actually, and with the phone she moves around everywhere in the country, goes to wild places on the road here and there, and all the time she says, I'm free, I'm free. And she has no connections, but all the time she's talking with the phone. So, but anyway, but this whole idea of I'm free, this freedom, independence is so valued that it is misunderstood as necessarily separateness from any close ties. So cultural diffusion of dominant Western individualistic models is important, even though Western thinkers and many of us are critical of extreme individualism in the West with regard to its costs, with regard to loneliness and so on. And yesterday also Niobe talked about that and complained about that. But nevertheless, the popular media is there and it is very powerful. There can be also another counteracting factor, especially in the context of immigration, and that is cultural lag and persistence, especially of rural to urban migrants and international migrants, where even though lifestyles have changed and therefore parents don't depend on their adult offspring for their material livelihood, they still insist on obedience-oriented child rearing and not allow autonomy to their children. So it can appear on both sides. And here I think the implications for application are there. What can be done? I think that there's a very important role that psychology can take here in contributing to human well-being globally, in child rearing, parent training, education, health services, in working with policymakers. These ideas and this kind of an awareness needs to be, or can be developed. Understanding that change is possible and autonomy and relatedness are compatible and developing into, especially with regard to adolescence development, we can help build some of these ideas and orientations in adolescence. And I think early adolescence might be seen as a touch point here for applications. This is a highly challenging period, and there's potential for sustained benefits. And it's a rather untapped period of human development in Turkey anyway, and also in many other places where childhood is targeted more and adolescence is targeted more, but this pre-adolescence or early adolescence needs more study and understanding. And what we are now doing, we have just started a 3-year intervention study in public schools in Istanbul, in low and middle income areas with early adolescence, and with experimental design, and using autonomous related self theory and positive youth development in general, and trying to build adolescent development and to help promote positive development with the eventual intention of getting this type of an adolescent support program into regular school curriculum for 6th graders, for example, in the country, which is an ambitious goal, and I hope we can do it, but I don't know. So I think, can we contribute to hopefully toward a more optimal development? I think there can be a significant role for informed education initiatives, prevention intervention programs, and policies addressing at the group and individual levels the developing child, family, and school for promoting optimal development. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Cigdem, for a terrific lecture, so much interesting material. We have about 25 minutes or so for conversation or questions. There's a microphone in the middle of the aisle there set up, and I'm sure Cigdem will be happy to take questions and entertain conversations. If you'd like to come up to the microphone and ask any questions, we'll give you a minute or two to do that. And then would you like to just handle your own questions? I'll just give you the microphone. So if you do have comments or questions, please come up.
There's a microphone there. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Cigdem. That was a very nuanced and very interesting look at that. I think goes way beyond the autonomy versus relatedness issue and approaches this in these dimensions. I'd like to suggest that there's perhaps another factor as well that refers to the larger cultural context, that refers to social structure rather than ideology and ideas about Westernness and so forth, and that is the kind of family that our modern economic system, which is highly mobile both geographically and socially, encourages, and that encourages a nuclear family household that is highly geographically mobile. So I think that, and much of the conflict that we see in adolescence with parents is because the kids, both the parents and the kids, are in this push-pull stage of having to move out into an autonomous world where they are also being pulled into the relatedness of the family, and that kind of conflict doesn't exist anywhere near to the same degree where families are embedded either in larger extended family structures or they're embedded in long-term stable communities of either kinship or community neighborhood. And I wonder if you would like to comment on the kinds of family structures and the relation of the family to the larger community, either of kin or of neighborhood, in this regard.
Well, absolutely. Of course, it's very important, especially when one thinks of North America, with vast distances and people moving, and family, some members, children, adult children might be in California and mother somewhere in New York or whatever. Certainly, the distances and mobility in this country create the challenges to relatedness and facilitate autonomy. No question about that, and that's the lifestyle. But also, of course, there are values and culture involved. For example, I saw a film recently, I can't remember now the name of it, but George Clooney, and can't remember the name, but it's about people being fired from organizations, from companies, and so on. But in that film, there was this couple who were going from place to place in their car and trying to figure out where to settle. And the only criterion for settling somewhere was if they liked the area. It looked nice. They could find a nice house or something like that. No consideration, not even no mention of where are our parents or the primordial family, childhood friends and so on. Complete freedom. You can just go anywhere and live anywhere, kind of an idea, which is so strange for the rest of the world, to the rest of the world, because you want to have those connections somehow. But also, I'm sure you're all familiar with Seinfeld, this, again, popular, whatever it's sitcom or whatever it's called, which you can see all over the world. And in this Seinfeld, very funny episodes, there are no parents around, and only if the parents are shown at all, they are ridiculed. And the others, the main characters' parents don't exist. It's only these friendships that have been chosen. It's individual choice that you choose your friend, but you cannot choose your family. So you can just leave the family, kind of thing. So these ideas are there, and of course reinforced with the lifestyles. But on the other hand, they leave something to be desired, I think, and the lack is experienced, and so it is at a cost. I think this relates to what you said. So this is how it is. Of course, just being stuck with your family and in your place of birth is not the way to go either, because people are moving. Immigrants, for example, Turkish immigrants or North African immigrants are moving to Europe, and so they are going away from their families. But nevertheless, the connectedness somehow remains. So how do they do it? Maybe we can learn something from their experience. Yes.
Thank you very much for the talk. You know this from my talk last night, but I'm fascinated by why we at this moment, I mean as a global world, why we hear research like this, we hear the argument, but we only hear half the story. So we only hear half the story, which is we hear autonomy-relatedness, we hear the importance of it, we hear how it's an essential ingredient and it's linked to mental health, et cetera, and we consistently only hear half the story, which is the autonomy part. And that's globally too. I mean, when in China and India, you're hearing, that the modern way of parenting is making sure their children can do what they want to do, be independent, find their dreams, in the sense of that's the part of the message they're hearing. And so I'm curious on your reflections on why, even though at this point I feel like as a field, we're almost yelling it, that relatedness is important, nobody listens in the larger world. They hear the autonomy and they turn a deaf ear to the relatedness. And I'm curious on what your perspective is on why, from a global perspective. I know why Americans do, but I don't get it why from a worldview the global world turns a deaf ear to that side of the finding.
It's a fascinating question, and there are many things to be said about it. But research, for example, some of the research that I presented is actually showing that together with autonomy is increasing, for sure, because it is necessary, it is adaptive, and it is not a threat. because of decreased material interdependencies. So there's no question about that. But at the same time, for example, research by Sunita Stewart and Bond from Hong Kong, and also research with immigrants in Europe, is showing that the relatedness is there also. When you ask parents, they may emphasize autonomy because it's something new, it's something modern, but the relatedness has always been there. So it's not a big thing. But let me,
it's not a question that it's always been there. We always know it's already been there, always been there for American parents as well. What's fascinating to me in looking at the research over the past 50 years or so is how much we continue still. We know it's there, but we don't emphasize it. So even, when I talk to Chinese parents, Indian parents, they will dismiss or downplay the related thing because they think that sounds, old-fashioned. For boys, right, yesterday it sounds gay. For Indian and Chinese parents, it sounds old-fashioned. So the way in which this repeatedly gets underneath the autonomy, it's just a bizarre thing, because we know that it's equally important as the autonomy.
Yeah. But I want to say a few other things related to that. For example, one study looked at Danish and Indian parents, and found that Danish parents emphasized relatedness more as a valuable asset for their children to have, whereas Indians did not. Now, when you look at this, is strange because you would expect just the opposite. But the point is, because it is lacking in the Danish context, they emphasize it. They think children should have it, whereas Indians already have it. They are all related, and so what is the point of emphasizing it more? Because it's already there. That's the idea. Another study, more recent, with Swedish and Turkish elderly people. And what was found was that Turkish elderly people had more connections with others. They had more visits and contacts with others than the Swedish. But the Swedish were more satisfied with the contacts that they had, because Turks had lots of contacts, but they expected even more. So they thought they didn't have enough. But the Swedes did not expect very many, and they were satisfied with the ones that they had. So all these normative issues of what is normal, what is not, and what is better, what is not, the whole ideational aspect of autonomy is there. And as I was saying, it's the popular media that pumps it all the time. This separateness, self-reliance, self-sufficiency, all standing on your own feet, all of this is very much put forward as the best thing, the best model. And so when you talk with educated Chinese and Indian parents, they are all going along with that because they think this is what their children need. And it is, it is important, but the relatedness is not salient in their mind because it's already there. It's so much taken for granted. I think some of it is that. But I think Heidi, for example, found that in India you found evidence for the third pattern also. And look, I think also, with immigrants, they are finding the third pattern. So, but psychology is a Western product. And when I look here, you're all North Americans or Western Europeans. So that's ingrained in culture and ideology.
We've been talking about autonomy and relatedness and psychological constructs, to some extent hierarchical abstract constructs. And I wonder if you've thought about whether it's useful to start complementing this with studies of how adolescents actually spend their time and how their time use, and Reed Larson has talked about this and many other people have talked about this, connects such that where are they at? Are they at home? Are they with their parents? And I think that might provide some complementary perspectives to the sort of belief system perspectives.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, those kinds of ecological studies and observational studies, especially with time use and space use, can provide really real insights. And I think it was said in this conference the day before yesterday, I believe, that in one of the sessions, that especially in the United States, there is so much age-separate activities. Adolescents are with adolescents, children are with children, adults are with adults. And across age, across developmental stage, connections are much less. Whereas, of course, in traditional societies, young children, older children, everybody, adults, elderly, are all together. So this, of course, makes a difference also. So there are all these aspects of what I just lump them all together as lifestyles, how people live, all need to be taken into account. But it's not only the material conditions. For example, let me just give you one example from the responses we got to the questions in the Value of Children study. We had a number of questions asking about, would you expect from your adult offspring to help you financially? Would you expect your adult offspring to help put their brothers or sisters through school or help them through school, kinds of things, all material and economic expectations. And in the original study, Germany was also involved in the study, and the United States. And the German researcher, without telling us, dropped all those questions because everybody was getting so angry that he thought there was no way he could do it at the pilot stage, drop the questions. Lois Hoffman, who was the American researcher, also said, oh, let me also not ask those questions. And she said, no, you have to ask them. So she did ask them with great difficulty because people were getting very much annoyed with questions like this. And they were saying, no, I don't want anything from my children. If they can take care of themselves, I'll be glad. So, and there was this kind of let him take care of himself, I take care of myself. I don't want anything from my children. I'm not dependent on anyone, especially my children, no. This kind of thing. And Turkish respondents were also annoyed. It was a difficult question for us also, because they were saying, what do you mean? Are you questioning the loyalty of my son? Of course, if our son is worthy of his family and family name, big thing, family name, of course he's going to take care of us. He's not going to leave us on the street. So you can say, of course, especially at that time, this is from the original study in 1970s, all these security benefits, insurance systems, social security, and so on were not, of course, as widespread in Turkey as in Germany and the US. But nevertheless, none of the Turkish respondents said anything like, I wish I didn't have to depend on my child. I wish I had independent income or something. Nobody said that. They said, of course. And because it's a matter of family honor. So values are important also. It's not just objective conditions. Of course, they feed into each other. They mutually influence each other also. Like in the Netherlands, and correct me if I'm wrong, young people get a stipend from the government if they are studying at the university. And they get more of a stipend if they live by themselves rather than with their families. Now, one can look at it this way. If they live by themselves, they have more expenses, right? But it is also a policy that has a centrifugal effect. that reinforces young people leaving the house. And in the US, if a young person does not leave the house and go away at age 18, it's not so good. And a person, especially an adult son at age 30 who lives with his parents, there's really something strange about that right here, but not in the world. So all of these things are there, and one can just approach it from different perspectives. But the point is, change should also be possible. Yes.
Thank you for that lovely talk. I'm trying to integrate this idea of the third model, or the integration between autonomy and relatedness, with data that shows that first-generation Hispanic girls especially really struggle with this very integration of relatedness and to the family of origin, and when they move to the United States, with this pressure to be autonomous, and that this leads to increased suicidal rates and so forth. So I'm trying to square this to increased rates in suicidal behavior in first-generation Hispanic girls. So I'm just trying to square this idea that we have on the one hand this model of optimal development, which is an integration of relatedness and autonomy from two different kind of cultural perspectives on family functioning, with the idea that this very integration of these two traditionally opposing forces could actually put a lot of pressure on girls or boys, for that matter, to do well. So I'm trying to get those two literatures together. I hope you can help me.
Yeah, well, yes, to maintain that balance, it's a balanced situation, and to maintain that balance is a challenge. It's not always easy, but there I find our role as promoters of well-being to go in that direction. I mean, that should be the direction for promotion of well-being, rather than emphasizing autonomy at the expense of relatedness. So just the understanding that the two can coexist, and the two of them do coexist, but it's a matter of how that is managed in everyday life, or in interventions, training, and so on. It's a theoretical perspective, but its applications need to be developed.
Thank you, Cigdem. Wonderful talk. I was delighted with the example of the young woman all over traveling with a phone saying, I'm free, while she's tethered to the phone. And it seems to me, not only is the autonomy and relatedness compatible, that young woman who's exemplifying the way technology has made distance irrelevant to connection suggests that we are free to connect. And that seems to be an interesting phenomenon to take into consideration. The dependence model, where you're totally interdependent, seems to emphasize a foundation of obligations, reciprocity, whereas the independence model emphasizes autonomy and choice, which obscures that the choice can be to connect. And it often is what young people are doing with technology. And the line between obligation and choice is not so easy. And I was thinking, as you were talking about moving away, parents in traditional societies thinking that would be horrendous. Well, the immigrants to Europe from North Africa and the Middle East send remittances home. And they are supporting their families at home, their extended kin, through a distance, through technology. the obligation is there, but it is combined with some element of choice. So that seems to be perhaps the next step in thinking through this model that you've proposed, where it is globally relevant, and we can think about what forms it takes, and bring in the notion of the changes between obligation to choice.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sumru. Sumru is also from Turkey and an old friend of mine. Yes, I think this is really insightful what you told us, and I agree. Yeah, the issue is this third model, autonomous related self model, in fact, is there. In fact, we found it, as I showed you, in 27 countries. It is there among the more educated, urban, middle-class parents who don't insist on obedience orientation in their child rearing. It is, in fact, much more common than we assume because of normative individualism. It's the normative individualistic ideals that are in the way of the recognition of both the need for this coexistence, but also the prevalence of this coexistence. It is the ideology that we have, the Western world has, and also psychology has, that I think is more in the way than anything else. A long time ago, Kenneth Keniston wrote about the myth of family independence. What he was referring to is that, okay, we all the time we talk about independence, but most families, especially those with lesser means, lower income families in the United States, are far from independent. They are highly interdependent. For example, a young woman is aided by her own mother in child rearing or this or that. But because of the norms of independence, because of normative individualism, there is ambivalence in this kind of a situation, and the young woman feels that she is dependent and therefore not doing so well because she depends on her mother. And the mother also feels ambivalent. Whereas in contexts where this interdependence is more acceptable, there's less ambivalence. But of course, with technology and with everything you say, it is possible to have the emotional interdependence or relatedness, that is, continued or even enhanced to satisfy the need for relatedness.
I've always, in reading Cigdem's papers and books and listening to her speak, she's a culturalist, she's a universalist, and she's holistic at the same time. And this is not easy to do. And she also reminds us that we have features of family processes, relationships, and culture change that are culturally elaborated and marked, and then we have those that are culturally suppressed. They exist, but for various reasons, they are either denied or suppressed or underappreciated. And one thing about Cigdem's work is she doesn't let us get away with that. She reminds us of these processes that exist both universally and have very wide, in some cases, cultural variation. So it's 10 o'clock, our time is up. Thank you, Cigdem, very much. It was terrific to have you here and present this kind of work. Thank you very much.